Thank you, HG. Thank you so much, guys, for closing us out. We have a great panel here. You've heard a lot about the Brownsville microgrid project, and actually, just the buzz about it the past 2 or 3 years was one of the key things that made us want to make sure we start this journey on our ETS at events here in Chicago because of this project here. So very honored to talk microgrids and then have make sure I pronounce it Raghav, right? Raghav talk a little bit more in depth about the clustering and the innovation that's happening. I think you're going to see where you have a national model being built here in terms of where microgrids go. Don't have to repeat all the conversations of resiliency we started with. We talked about Houston and the restoration process going on here. So what we're going to do here is first I want to have the panelists introduce themselves, and then Raghav is going to have a short presentation to talk about some of his work here. So let's start off here. Raghav.
Guess I don't really need a mic, but I'll still use one. So my name is Sri Raghavan Kothandaraman. A lot of people find it hard to pronounce, so I go by Raghav. Hopefully that's short. Um, and I'm a manager in the Emerging Technologies Group here at Smart Grid at ComEd. I've been with ComEd for about 7 years. I started as an engineer in the Smart Grid group, in the Emerging Technology group, and then I was there for 3.5 years, and then I moved over to capacity planning or distribution planning. Was there for about again 2.5 years, and then moved over to distribution automation a year over there, and then like this role and this opportunity came up, and I just couldn't pass. I was lucky enough to be able to come back to this group and to be able to lead this group. So, what we do in emerging technology is to test, evaluate, analyze any new emerging technologies that could potentially come onto our service territory from a smart grid perspective. So that would involve anything from like microgrids, DERMS, smart inverters, um, and EVs, and PMUs and distribution linear state estimators and so on and so forth. We also have a lot of DOE grants that we're associated and working with different partners, and so a lot of different external collaborations as well. Um, so I'll stop at that.
Jeff?
All right, sure. Yeah, so Jeff Chapman, I'm a project manager with 1898 and Co., part of Burns and McDonnell. I'm really a distribution planning engineer at my core. So throughout my career, I've really been focused on model development, building models really of the power flow system across multiple platforms. Subsequent to that model creation piece, we execute, all manner of analyses in those models, try to capture various grid scenarios, evaluate impacts, and ultimately, define solutions for, utilities across the U.S. So all the fun stuff that Raghav just mentioned, we capture those scenarios again, digitally in PowerFlow, and look to mitigate any potential issues and um, develop the grid of the future.
Excellent. So now I'll pass it off to Raghav, and you can talk us through some of the presentation that you have.
Yeah, hopefully I can make it short. Um, so this is essentially like going to give you an overview of the Bronzeville community microgrid. You know, utilities typically focus on reliability and with the emphasis more on resiliency of the grid and looking at resiliency from a perspective of like low frequency, high impact events. Microgrids are something that can improve the resiliency of the system. And so uh, we Comet thought of building like a microgrid, especially with like um, uh, the scenario changing from like a traditional grid to like bidirectional flow and DERs. You essentially want to create or know how you can control like DERs in real time and how you can still maintain the stability of the system. Uh, and like microgrid is something that like helps you do that. Microgrid is just to give a small perspective. It's a grid within a grid, so even if the major grid goes out, the microgrid has the capability to be able to provide power to that physical boundary. So this Bronzeville community microgrid, as the name suggests, is inside Bronzeville, a community in the south side of Chicago. And we have like 7 megawatts of load over there, like and it serves like 1,000 customers, which includes RCI mix, so residential, commercial, as well as industrial customers. Um, it has about 4.8 megawatt of natural gas generation, but also has like 750 kilowatt of solar and 500 kW 2 megawatt hour battery storage system there. So we have a microgrid controller, which is the brains of the microgrid, as we call it, which is essentially used to control the microgrid itself. So if the microgrid goes from what we call grid connected mode, which is a normal mode, to like islanded mode, the microgrid controller takes responsibility of the system, and it basically oversees the whole operation of the system. Um, this is kind of the footprint of the microgrid. As you can see, not sure if it's clear, but the east side of the physical boundary is Martin Luther King Drive. The west side is South State Street. The north side is 33rd Street, and I think the south side is 37th or 41st. I'm not sure. Um, the green picture that you see over there is the solar, and that's actually a little bit outside the physical boundary, but electrical boundary is still within that like BCM. And this is sort of a high level single line diagram, as we call it, of the microgrid. The one thing that I'd like to note is that this microgrid has like two feeders, feeder 1 and feeder 2. In normal mode, these feeders are connected through a tie switch. There are 3 tie switches there, which are marked green, and those are generally open. Green is generally open. Um, when the microgrid goes into islanded mode, we call it partial islanding or full islanding, one of these tie switches would close, and the gas generator kicks in. The point of interconnection switches, which are POI 1 and 2 marked there on feeder 1 and 2 respectively, they open up and they form a full island. And there's a whole sequence that goes beyond it. Yes, I see. I have a hand up. So absolutely. Yes. So the our operations control center, we leave it up to the operations control center to take that final decision. But yes, they do have the capability to go into islanded mode if needed. One thing that I'd like to point out is that apart from those 2 feeders itself in normal mode, there are other ties that those feeders have. So typically, operators would like to use those ties, and only when those ties are exhausted or when they're not able to carry load, would they switch it on to like go into microgrid mode. But right as of today, our operators have the capability to be able to do that. And in fact, when we did the testing 2 months back in the field, we were able to make sure that our operators were able to enable that planned landing mode through their ADMS or through their SCADA system. And then that would then talk over to the MGMS system. And then the MGMS has like an automated planned landing sequence that it will automatically trigger, and no manual controls are needed. We can just oversee the operation, and the steps take place automatically through like an automated sequence. Um, that these are some of the functionalities that we tested. Um, or some of the functionalities that are part of the MGMS system. Um, we see normal grid connected operation where you can do like peak shaving and solar battery coordination. Uh, SBC, or solar battery coordination, as we call it, comes from like dispatching battery to address or to compensate for the fluctuations of the PV, and that's fixed output over like a 15-minute period. Apart from that, we have partial islanding, which would island only one feeder, which is feeder 1, which is where the generation is located. And then there's also full islanding, which would cover feeder 1 and 2. And there's black start capabilities, load restoration, as well as the main thing that for me is like once you go into islanded mode, how do you come back into grid connected mode? There needs to be like sync check operation that needs to be performed, and there's partial and full reconnection as part of it as well. The one thing that I've been saving is that there's this Brownsville community microgrid is also in close proximity to the Illinois campus microgrid, which is Illinois Institute of Technology's like campus microgrid. So with these two microgrids in close proximity, there's a wonderful opportunity to do a microgrid cluster where you have one microgrid sharing resources or talking to the other microgrid. And we're working with Illinois Institute of Technology to be able to do that. And from my limited experience and knowledge, this is probably the world's first utility clustered microgrid. Um, and so uh, that's that. I think I've talked about like islanding as a feature and how it can like work. And I won't go into like more detail on this. And same with clustering as well. And that pretty much wraps up my quick presentation.
Raghav, thank you so much. And congratulations.
Thank
Congratulations.
you.
It's amazing there. Jeff, you there's a lot to digest and you're getting to work with customers across the US. Maybe some thoughts on some of the innovation you see there. And then also add like, are you getting more requests from your customers and partners to seek out and work on projects like this?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. Definitely a lot more requests for, again, analyzing how we integrate technologies like these microgrids to legacy distribution systems in particular. Um, I mean, I guess the main thing that comes to mind when I hear, presentations like this is, again, distribution planning engineer at my core. And so I'm starting to think, okay, what are all the scenarios here that I need to capture such that I can ensure that clustering, declustering, sync check. Again, there are myriad system conditions that we've got to confirm, right? So it becomes very combinatorially burdensome, I would say, right? Capturing the status of all of these devices that, again, are historically not dynamic. Now they are dynamic. Load profiles are changing across the distribution system. Load factor looks very different today than it did, 20, 30 years ago, even. A lot more peakiness in loads if you're unfamiliar with the term load factor. Um, and then even down to the resources, right, that exist within microgrids. If we're talking about renewables, solar does not have a predefined, consistent output day to day. Even considering things like snow cover, right, on PV panels. How does snow cover impact the generation output there? So, again, it becomes an exercise in combinatorics. This is something that distribution planning engineers need to be very aware of. It's labor intensive, a lot of analysis involved. So that's kind of where my head initially goes, but also very optimistic. Look forward. There's a lot of cool things that this is going to enable, increased resilience. Again, a lot of the things that Raghav mentioned. So
And Raghav and Jeff, you feel free to answer this. Like a lot of innovation going on, but what are some of the barriers you see out there that we should be thinking of as an industry to remove to enable more pilots and projects, just like the one that was presented there. So Raghav, you want to take a stab?
Yeah. First of all, I would say that the journey to having this successful microgrid is not a short one at all. It's a long journey, and there are different reasons to it, right? This Bronzeville community microgrid started as like an idea back in 2015 or 2017 for us. When I joined the company in 2017, this was already in like motion. So the project started even before that. So there's a lot of pieces, especially to like deploying microgrids of this scale, being a utility as well. Like there's regulatory challenges, so we've had to like convince ICC, which is Illinois Commerce Commission, about like why this microgrid would be beneficial, right? And then like second is the vision, like what do you envision to this microgrid to do? um, And some of that comes up with like what are the different capabilities that this microgrid controller needs, like how do you design the microgrid controller, how do you like test the microgrid controller. We've had to like work with like partnerships with DOE, where we've got like several DOE grants to work on like several pieces of the microgrid. One of the pieces was doing like microgrid controller testing, which like we've tested like around like 400 plus test cases in the lab over the course of that like grant. And we've also had like another grant, which is the Shines Mist grant, and where we've developed like that solar battery coordination or microgrid integrated solar storage technology, Mist, as they call it. And then there's also the piece of like even within the microgrid controller itself, like how does the microgrid controller talk with all of these various resources, right? So in general for this like microgrid project, there are like challenges from protection challenges to like microgrid controller development challenges to like fiber communication that needs for like high speed communication, so that the controllers can talk to the devices, be it reclosers or like the generation, etc., etc., right? And so for me, like those are some of the barriers, uh, without going into detail about construction issues and permit issues and this and that. So
Yeah. I mean, yeah, again, I would second, everything that Raghav said there. And if I was going to add anything, if I do go back once more to the planning piece, there's a significant level of data intensity that's involved here. Um, and even capturing some of the devices digitally, inverter models, we often have to default to some kind of an inverter model that again is default. Um, we can't always crack open that black box inside the models and see the inner workings. So yeah, the data intensity and capturing all of the various elements with sufficient fidelity is a big challenge as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to open it up to questions. We have two awesome experts here, and right here, I knew we'd have plenty of questions.
around 1,000.
I want to put solar on my house or battery, whatever. Am I now like ComEd's like, well, hold on, there's different things you got to do right now, or it's the same as the grid anywhere?
It depends, right? Depends on if the solar is behind the meter or if the solar is in front of the meter. But either ways, I don't think that should be a
No one's going
problem.
to screw up your microgrids.
I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of checks that would need to be done for
Okay.
like behind the meter. That's like more like offsetting your load, and so that would also go into your like into our interconnection queue. And so I don't see that as like a problem. But like irrespective of that, we need to run a lot of studies to be able to make sure that like if your DER is getting interconnected, is that going to how is that going to affect the grid, or how is that going to help the grid? So definitely that is definitely possible.
Can I ask another one, Jason? Cost cost wise, cost wise of the microgrid versus your regular distribution network, double, triple, quadruple, 10 times?
So the net cost of the microgrid, including those grants, I think were about around 25 million is what I heard. But the those we of those two DOE grants, one of them was 1.2 million, the other one was 4.8 million, just from 4 million cost share from our side, and DOE cost share was around 4 million, I think. So that helps offset some of it, but it also like this is essentially the scale of this is huge, right? And so we would need like partnerships to be able to do this successfully, and that's essentially what my team is um, working on like every single day.
Yeah. Quick question for Jeff Strickle on the cost there, Jeff, because that's an important one. Do you guys, is there enough data and use cases out there to put better costing and projections around especially like these novel projects. Are you guys seeing that? Do you have data sets to work with, or is it, or are you making a lot more estimates or along the way when something very creative like this comes along?
Well, so just to be completely transparent here, I don't. I mean, I'm not necessarily the cost estimator. I'm very much focused again on electric parameters and power flow. But I mean, I guess I would maybe amend some of what Raghav said here and just say that again at scale, when you're thinking about quantifying benefits, right, reliability benefits, resiliency benefits, we have ways that we do that. Um, again, looking far ahead, we think about clustering these microgrids. You have this almost fractal tessellation kind of view, right, where they're all clustered together and you have self-similarity at different levels of the grid. Um, I think if you look out far enough, it does become very, very difficult to quantify what those long-term benefits are. But again, it's an optimistic view as we look forward, I think.
And just to add, I'm no cost expert as well, but we also have like metrics that we're collecting as part of the lifespan of the microgrid, which is about like we need to report to like Illinois Commerce Commission uh, for 10 years, I believe. And so we collect not only technical data, reliability data, socioeconomic data, and so all of these metrics are getting collected and are being reported out as well.
I have a double question, which I understand you may not be the right people to answer, but humor us. Do you see microgrids as economically viable, right? Actually is um, the unit economics of the kilowatt hour is reproducible and we can make a business out of this, right? So beyond Bronzeville. And then the second is somebody was asking about the tornadoes and and granted maybe they didn't need to use the microgrid this time, but have you seen over the past few years some sort of marquee business or consumer benefits of being part of the microgrid versus being outside of the microgrid?
Maybe I can take a swing generally first. So I mean, when you think about the resource mix within some of these microgrids and the intelligent control that we have, we can dispatch those resources intelligently and charge batteries and discharge batteries in a way that is, um, you know, economically optimal given a set of parameters. Um, so, again, generally speaking, I can certainly say that. Um, and then the second question is probably more for Raghav, because I think it was specific to the BCM.
Yeah, one something that I'd like to mention is not every microgrid needs to be of this scale. Microgrids can be of different scales. Um, Essentially, if you have like DER, let's say solar and battery, uh, you might be able to like offset your not just offset your load, but like when there is an outage, it's possible that you can like keep your home running, right? And so if you think about from that angle, um, like I think like the price of batteries are still high, but the technology as it matures, I think there's potential to get there. And like apart from that, like are there benefits to being inside a microgrid? I would say yes, because you have the capability to be able to like power customers even when the grid is out. So from a capability standpoint, I think that's great to have, right? Like if I would think of it like if there's an inverter in my house, would I want to use it or would I not want an inverter and like not use that benefit, right? So that's how I would think about it, but I'm not sure if it really answers the question.
And then I guess one other element too to the first point. I mean, there's opportunity to participate in ancillary markets, like in Texas. I mean, ERCOT's sending these fast frequency response signals to what they call DGRs. The batteries that are deployed throughout the ERCOT territory. So um, there's some economic, incentive there as well. But
I have two questions, so you can answer both or just choose one. The first is I've taken I ran an internship program for 7 years, and one of our annual field trips was going to the Ameren microgrid, and it was always their favorite day because you get to be up close with everything. So my first question is, do you see a future for microgrids that partners with education to utilize it as an educational tool as well as a way to offset when there's an outage in the grid? And then my second question is, do you also see an application for microgrids with customers that have medical necessities that require them to always be with power, or for like healthcare institutions?
So I can take a stab at that, right? The first question, like, can it be used for educational purposes? The one thing that I'd like to mention is that, like, we at ComEd have our own like lab in Maywood, and we do tours every like almost every like month to like specific audience. Today there was supposed to be a tour for the interns, but like because of storm restoration activities that got like cancelled. There's also there's also tours of like the lab in itself and like various labs there, and so definitely yes, it can be used for like educational purposes. um, we've also given tours of the Bronzeville community microgrid itself to like I think utilities from Japan have come here to ComEd, and there's also like people from Germany who came here earlier this year that we've given tours to. So that is definitely yes. And as far as critical customer goes, thank you. I missed that point. I should have stated that as part of my presentation. This Bronzeville community microgrid serves some critical customers, and like the public safety headquarters, Chicago public safety headquarters or the police headquarters is one of the critical customers there. There's also some schools and academies, as well as some hospitals there, I believe, as part of the microgrid itself. Hope that answers both your questions.
So no, um, so I'll give some additional background as well. So before I became a planning engineer, I actually was a high school mathematics teacher. So I did that for several years before becoming an engineer. And so, yeah, I mean, my view is if we're not exposing, secondary students to some of this stuff, you know, broadly, we're probably not doing it right in public education. So, yeah.
And sorry, one more thing that I'd like to add is that there's a dedicated group in our company which is called Smart Grid Programs, which also looks at a community outreach. So we've in fact worked with Bronzeville community advisors as part of the Bronzeville Community Microgrid Project, as well as we're working with communities outside of Bronzeville, like Rockford. We're working with Rockford communities. There's a lot of STEM awareness activities that we volunteer for. So this is more of a holistic effort, and it's not just like one single department. We get support throughout the company to be able to do this, and it is needed to be able to do something of this scale. So,
Come over here. Question over here.
Dan, I'm curious to see where you see the interest for microgrids. Do you see other neighborhoods trying to replicate that, or maybe self-contained campuses looking to be a bit more resilient?
a question for me or in
Both,
general?
either.
Yeah, I mean, again, I can jump in. So, it is a requirement in a significant number of the planning engagements that we are in these days to evaluate non-wires alternatives, which in some cases that may involve establishing a microgrid somewhere, right? Um, there are a lot of things that kind of fall into that bucket, but certainly, yeah. it is, like I say, it's a requisite piece of a very significant number of the planning studies that we step into today. No, does that mean that that's the solution that we ultimately, go with? Maybe, maybe not. But again, we are very intentional about making that one of the scenarios that we do layer onto our modeling and our project definition. So it may not always involve a new substation, a new transmission line, a new, you know, line rebuild. So
Yeah, I mean, I would second Jeff on that. So definitely, like as I mentioned earlier, they can be of microgrids can be of different scales, right? Like home microgrids, neighborhood microgrids, like community microgrids, utility owned microgrids. Uh, so definitely, I think uh, there is more interest like developing in that area.
yeah,
Yes.
I remember when the Bronzeville microgrid was going through its kind of starts and stops, and one of the concerns was if you're going to call it a community microgrid, you have to have ways to validate the community benefit, especially when you look at the price tag and the potential cost burden pressure it could create by spending money to put in such infrastructure at such a price point that ultimately finds its way to a bill. How can you make sure the benefit outweighs that potential incremental cost increase? Did the community work with you to validate performance metrics or ways to ensure that this title of being a community microgrid relates to clear wins for the community? And if so, what are some examples?
Well, I'll be very honest. I do not know specifically on that aspect, but what I do know is that we do collect metrics from like I think over 100 metrics that we report on. Like, and those metrics not only include like technical metrics like reliability metrics, like outage numbers, etc., but also focus on community aspects like socioeconomic aspects. And so there's definitely a lot of like metrics that we collect and report on to be able to justify that
Hmm,
to the ICC. So,
that makes sense.
but I do not know the specifics of it. I can definitely check and get back to you on that.
yeah. I mean, similar answer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, the project definition piece, we are trying our best to project benefits,
Mhm.
both from a very purely technical perspective, um, but also from an energy efficiency perspective is something else that we might consider. Um, again, when we think about microgrids, traditionally you think about an energy unit going from source to load. It may have to travel hundreds of miles, right? Um, at a microgrid, it's co-located with the facility. Now it's not traveling even a full mile in some cases, right? So there's an energy efficiency benefit there. I know the focus today has largely been on resilience and reliability, but
Yeah.
that's a corollary benefit that does exist. And again, these are things that we consider in addition to the potential reliability gains.
Yeah,
So
it seems like, if you've heard the adage, build it and they will come, with regards to stadiums and places where people would come, if this becomes a resilience hub, which people know that perhaps has ways to address things like dialysis, oxygen, uh, relief from extreme heat, those type of things become ways to further kind of underwrite the value of a microgrid for the type of community resilience it provides.
And there's also some research going on about dynamically expanding microgrid boundaries. So those are some Department of Energy grants that focus on that part of like research where like you not only have like a microgrid now, but in like can you dynamically expand the boundary of the microgrid and serve more customers and get more benefits in terms of like needs. So
Just an observation I've seen on this topic is about hosting capacity. We're electrifying, we have such a commitment to electrify. The the gating function on that is hosting capacity, especially when you're trying to align it with timelines for commitments to getting things done. And so having nodes where you have great headroom for hosting capacity is going to attract clean energy investment, because that's the place where you could electrify a fleet. That's the place where you could work on building electrification. So perhaps tying that to some of these resilience measures starts to build it, and they will come for what we want is the right path forward.